and stress for students in faraway countries. In low power distance countries, the bosses do not micromanage. In high power distance countries, employees expect the boss to micromanage them. In low power distance, you might even see the employees hanging out with the boss after work. You will never see this in a high power distance country. China is a very high power distance country, and the boss will never speak to the employee directly unless there's a big problem. Which made my trainings in China a little bit controversial, because my trainings are about emotional intelligence and assertiveness and how you're supposed to say what you feel in the right way. And in China, they would never do that. So they would be giggling all the time. And what does giggling mean? Giggling could mean 10 different things. I think they were embarrassed, thinking, oh, he's working so hard, but we can't possibly do what he's saying. So that was quite an interesting culture shock for me there. Most management books are written for low power distance readers. However, 70% of the world is in a high power distance culture. So when somebody from a high power distance culture is reading these books, they have to set it through the power distance filter in order to put what they read into practice. Again, no small source of confusion for people. If a low power distance boss asks an employee, what do you think about this? The employee will give their opinion. If a high power distance boss asks the employee, what do you think about that? The employee might say, well, what do you think about it? And whatever the boss says, the employee will just nod. There are many unpredictable differences in high versus low power distance colleagues working together. The cooperation will be highly influenced by what country they come from. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, it just explains how things get done in different places. Well, it's always the North Americans that speak up at business meetings, while most of the Asians just keep their mouth closed. But the culturally intelligent boss knows how to deal with the situation and is able to encourage their employees to contribute and be creative and active. If your training materials are not where you want them to be, that doesn't mean that you should make a big deal about it. They will get there. You have to take it easy when you're in a country with a different power distance, because otherwise you're going to get yourself into trouble and somebody's going to lose face. The third dichotomy will be, I have to go faster. Okay, I'm going to shorten my, I realize the time. I'm going, okay. Uncertainty avoidance is the level of tolerance to the unpredictable. People from a high uncertainty avoidance country do whatever they can to eliminate uncertainty and ambiguous situations. Let me ask you these questions, true or false? When the future seems unpredictable, I feel anxious. It makes me uncomfortable when someone provides unclear instructions. I try to avoid any situation where the risks are unfamiliar. Now, based on if you come from a high or low uncertainty avoidance country, your answers to those questions will be quite different. Laws and customs are built in to these cultures for stability of the environment. It makes ambiguous situations few and far between. Germany, Denmark, and Japan are highly organized, providing predictability. Turkey is also a high uncertainty avoidance country. They have many laws and rules built in order to minimize uncertainty. Some countries are less organized, but still highly risk intolerant. Think of Italians, for example. You think the Italians are wild, but the Romans had a quite strict codified set of laws which holds over in Italy today. Italy, as compared to its neighbors, is quite a high uncertainty avoidance country. Portugal also scores very high on uncertainty avoidance, extremely high. And if anybody can explain that to me after, I'd appreciate that. I don't know that much about Portugal, but they had among the highest scores of uncertainty avoidance on the chart. Other countries like UK, Jamaica, even China, Sweden, Denmark, tolerate uncertainty. They don't mind getting up in the morning, not knowing what their day will bring. They take one thing at a time, muddling through the day, as the Brits say. They are flexible. They have a fluid movement from the beginning to the end of the day. They don't mind not knowing what's happening next. They are able to shift gears. That's just what they're used to, and that makes them comfortable. There's no reason to plan far in advance. Now, demographics do not play a role in this. For example, Germany and the UK have quite similar demographics, but Germans are very punctual. They have a lot of structure and order. They are prepared for the worst. They have laws on the books to prepare for things which have never even happened yet. That's how structured and uncertainty avoidant Germany is. Whereas Britain is just the opposite. Britain doesn't even have a written constitution. Now, this is also a source of frustration in meetings where the British think that the Germans are too tight, and the Germans think that the Brits should get their act together. It doesn't mean that if you were in a country with with low uncertainty avoidance, for example, like Holland, it doesn't mean that you're risk-free. It just means that you're stress-free. Excuse me. Let me say that again. If you're from a country with a low uncertainty avoidance, that means you don't mind uncertainty. It doesn't mean that you have no stress. It just means that your stress and anxiety would be geared and pointed at things other than the uncertain future. So don't think that people from low uncertainty avoidance countries are stress-free, because they're not. Now, you can see this in music, for example. It manifests. German music is very structured. There's very little syncopation. Baroque music is about as predictable as you can get, and that's mostly German. And Italian, another uncertainty avoidant country. Whereas India music they have a 22-note scale, they have a lot of strings, their music has a lot of interesting and fluid sounds going in and out of each other, and the music is quite beautiful, full of syncopation, key changes, the tabla drums, all these interesting sounds would come from a country with a low uncertainty avoidance. They don't mind the non-structure of it. Now, compare driving. When it comes to driving, compare the high uncertainty avoidant Germany with low uncertainty avoidant India. In German, they drive very predictably. In German, the Germans are very empathetic drivers. They communicate with other drivers. Everybody goes. In India, the rules of the road is the largest vehicle has the right of way. Nevertheless, traffic moves. Traffic moves as quick as it possibly can. Now, if you're at work and you are dealing with somebody from a high uncertainty avoidant country, you want to give them specific instructions. That makes them the most comfortable. If you are from a low uncertainty avoidant, if you're dealing with somebody from a low uncertainty avoidant country, you want to grant them some autonomy to do things themselves. You want to avoid dogma. You want to minimize petty rules because those rules would make a person from a low uncertainty avoidant country quite nervous. Again, be careful about prejudices and assumptions. Don't think that low uncertainty avoidant countries are careless or take too many risks. That's not the case. Don't think that people from high uncertainty avoidance countries don't trust you. It may seem like that, but that's not the case. They are just used to, and they have grown up like this, and all the thinking around them has been to avoid uncertainty or be attracted to it, as in some cases. You have to come to a compromise and an understanding with discussion. Fourth topic is the cooperative culture versus competitive culture. When you're driving, do you cooperate with other drivers? Do you give people the right of way at the zebra? Or do you try to get from point A to point B as quick as possible? This is a reflection of whether you are a cooperative person or competitive person. Do you strive for democracy, compromises, consensus, or do you prefer to get your way most of the time? Also a reflection of this dichotomy. Now, Geert Hofstede doesn't call it competitive and cooperative. He calls it masculine and feminine. Whereas masculine countries are more competitive and feminine countries are more cooperative. I don't particularly like that heading, so I'm going to use the cooperative and competitive for my discussion. Now, cooperative countries are nurturing. Relationships are supportive. They take social care of their employees. In competitive countries, it's all about achievement, success, and results. Now, when it comes to foreign relations, what's your opinion? Do you think that a country should conduct its foreign relations in a collaborative, cooperative, compromising way? Or do you think a country should get their national interests by being the mightiest and the best? Most people will have a combination of this. They would like to be cooperative and be the best. Now, some countries, yeah?
How is this point tied to the first point, individualistic versus collaborative?
It overlaps a lot, but not across the board. There are definitely people who are from collectivist cultures who are competitive in nature.
So is this maybe South Korea as an example?
What do I have here? I think I have South Korea as a definite. No, the examples I have here would be Japan, which is a low individualist country. They're a collectivist country, but highly competitive. And Canada and Scandinavia are the opposite. They are very individualistic, but also very cooperative countries. So it doesn't always, it can be counterintuitive at times. Now, if you ask a cooperative person, yeah?
I have another question on the Arabic state, because you said about cooperative and competitive that you can call them also like women and men, which I also don't like that much, but how could be, for example, in Arabic state, I would say that they are cooperative, but if you should take them like this women and men state, that they are more men than women, or how is it there?
It's true, and
cooperative and competitive.
Well, the Arab states are, they didn't even show up on the chart, which means they're probably in the middle.
Okay.
Now, as far as it being masculine or feminine, you know, that was just Hofstede's way of giving this a label. And I don't know why he did that. It was 20 years ago. Maybe since then he's changed it. But on his website, he still lists it as masculine and feminine. So I don't know enough about the Arab countries. I just know that they were not on there. Arab countries showed up as being, the Arab countries were, they were collectivist, but as far as they were cooperative or competitive, I'm not sure. If you ask a person from a cooperative country, what's life all about? You'll get an answer that they might say, team effort, social harmony, pleasing my family, social advancement. If you ask somebody from a competitive country, what's life all about? Their answers will be more about their about achievement, about making money, about every person for himself. There's not enough money in the world for everybody, so I need more of it. That would be a competitive person's answer to that question. No. I'm going to move to the fifth. I'm shortening this because I see it's almost 12. All right. Now, the concept of time is also very different from culture to culture. Some cultures are clock time countries. Some cultures are event time countries. Let's say you have a golf appointment with a couple of friends. Tea time is at 8 o'clock. And you're waiting for your Brazilian friend to show up. You get there a couple of minutes early. And your friend, Ricardo from Brazil, hasn't showed up yet. What are you going to do? You say, okay, let's not worry about it. We'll just wait for him. We'll have a cup of coffee. It's 8:15. He's still not there. You give him a call and he says, oh, hello, my friend. I'll be right there. At 8:45, you say, the hell with it. I'm not waiting any longer. And you start to play. Now, your day is already changed because now you only have time for 9 holes instead of 18. People are inconvenienced, more than just your group. Other people also have to wait. Golf is the epitome of clock time. There's tea time, you have to move fast because people behind you are waiting. Now, what about Ricardo? He's late. He shows up at 9 o'clock. And he says, oh, you guys waited for me? That's terrible. Why did you wait for me? Now, why is it acceptable for Ricardo to show up an hour late like that? It seems like a lack of respect. But in the mind of Ricardo and event time countries, it's not a lack of respect. They are just on event time and not clock time. Now, what do you do about people like that? Some people say, tell them to come an hour early. I don't like that. Because what if they come a half an hour early, then they're waiting for you, and that's also not ideal. So I don't like the idea of telling somebody to show up an hour early just so they would get there on time. That's not cool. Different cultures function on different timetables, and this can seem very unusual if you're used to another concept of time. In event time countries like Brazil, the event begins when everybody shows up. You can't predict what's going to happen. Somebody might get stuck in traffic. Somebody might take a detour on the way to visit a friend. Anything can happen. So they don't get stressed out about it. They just see the event starts when everybody shows up. Now, to people from clock time countries, everybody's supposed to show up on time. They're quite egalitarian, people from clock time countries. They want everybody to show up on time, even their best friends, even their family. Nobody has an excuse. If you're going to be late, you call. Simple as that. Now, most of the world is on event time. Latin America, most of Africa, Southern Europe, much of Asia, they are on event time, where other countries like the US, most of Europe, are on clock time. Punctuality is important to them. Things get done on time. And if you're late, that's a show of disrespect. Now, there is an overlap between competitive countries and high uncertainty countries and clock time countries. There is definitely an overlap there, because those are the egalitarians. Those are the ones that have this individualist idea where everybody has the same rules, including the clock. Everybody has to be there on time. So there will be overlap like that. They have this internal locus of control that I mentioned. In clock time countries, they account for all uncertainties when they make the plan. They give extra time buffer if necessary. They built in flexibility just in case something goes wrong, and it's planned for. All eventualities have been incorporated into the schedule. Time is money for them. Whereas in event time, it's not about respect, it's not about punctuality, it's about sharing your precious time with a small in-group first. So those people from event time countries are used to priorities in a different way that clock time people are. If you're like me and you check the tram schedules the night before, you're probably a clock time person. Now, thanks to globalization, there is a push in many event time countries to start working on clock time. Because time is money, international business. For example, China. China was an event time country. Now they're a very clock time country. That's because of business and globalization, and they changed quite quickly. If you are working together with somebody from another time culture, you have to make allowances for that. And if you don't, the project might be jeopardized. If you are a clock time person and you're dealing with an event time person, they might not meet deadlines. If you are an event time person and you're dealing with a clock time person, they might appear stiff and rigid. Now, this is just appearance. How are we supposed to deal with that? By discussion, compromise. If you're dealing with an event time person and the person is not meeting deadlines, you explain to them the consequences of not meeting a deadline. You explain to them that you're willing to help meet the deadline. If you're an event time person and you're dealing with a clock time person, you just have to get used to the fact that this person is going to be on time, they are going to make their deadlines, and the only way to come to a consensus or a compromise about that is to discuss with each other the consequences and results of one way or another, and you will come to an understanding in the middle. Now, Edward Hall, a sociologist, calls this monochronic time versus polychronic time. Monochronic time, one thing happens at a time. Polychronic time, event time. Extreme polychronic cultures would be Native Americans, Aborigines, tribal cultures, where at these tribal meetings, the one with the talking stick can talk as long as they want without being interrupted. Interrupting somebody is considered rude and bad luck. Now, there are clusters of polychronic time to be found also in our monochronic time culture. For example, by nonprofit organizations, NGOs. Those are polychronic organizations because it's much harder to measure their results. They deal with things as they arise. The issues arise, they deal with it. So you'll find also in our culture certain polychronic and event time organizations. Phones, telephones, smartphones, mobile phones over the past 15 years have caused a lot of anxiety in event time cultures. Because those people, they don't want to be accessible all the time. When they're dealing with somebody that they love and care about, they want to deal with that person. If you're going to interrupt them, then interrupt them in person. So these phones have been quite a cause of stress for a lot of people from those countries. Now, your Brazilian friend will eventually show up to play golf. But that doesn't stop him from being a father, a neighbor, an uncle, a colleague, all at the same time. So don't expect that person is going to adhere to clock time just because you do. You deal with this with non-confrontational discussion. Explain the consequences and consider the other person's attitude towards time. Make allowances for it, and cooperation will move forward. The sixth dichotomy is direct versus indirect communication. Verbal versus nonverbal meaning. Some cultures are more verbally explicit than others. Indirect cultures, like ours, like in the States, like in Switzerland, words mean everything. You take people's words at face value. There's a little open for interpretation. When you're in indirect cultures, like China for example, you take cues from the context. You always have to see around the words and read between the lines. As these people, you realize when you're in an indirect culture that people don't say what they mean and they don't mean what they say. You just have to deal with that. They will give you advice which might even be better for themselves than for you. That's just one of the characteristics of an indirect culture. In general, women are more indirect than men across the world. If you're driving and she's thirsty, she won't say, "Hey, let's stop for a drink." She'll say, "How you doing, honey? You thirsty?" There is families and companies are also kind of indirect subcultures in themselves. Indirect people may never get to the point. They will beat around the bush the whole time, and your job is to get the meaning from whatever it is they're saying, taking all the context and cues into account. What's not said is just as important as what's said. It's harder to travel around an indirect country. When you ask for directions from an indirect person, they might tell you, go past the old mayor's house, make a right towards the river, and when you get to the place where the old train station used to be, it's right across the street. Because they are dealing in context. They are not dealing with the words themselves, meaning what the words are supposed to mean. They will give you a broader picture of anything that they're saying. If you visit a high context, by the way, I'm going to call this is also sometimes called high context versus low context cultures, where indirect communication translates to high context, and direct cultures translate to low context. Is that clear? At least those two things go together great. When a low context direct person enters a room, they focus on what they came in for. When a high context indirect person enters a room, they notice the decor. They notice the lighting. They notice what's all around. It's all about the impression that is being made by this scene, by the situation. And they did a very interesting study, which I think was really cool, They showed a group of students, they showed a lot of students, pictures of two objects which are quite normal, but the objects didn't quite fit together normally. For example, they showed a camel in a hospital corridor, or a sheep in a concert hall. The American students all said, what did you see? The question, what did you see? They said, I saw a camel, I saw a sheep. The Chinese students were perplexed. They saw a camel in a strange place. Why is there a sheep in a concert hall? They were concerned about the anomaly of it. They got the bigger picture. That's high context. Whereas the American students, such low context, they didn't see the anomaly of it. It didn't faze them at all. They were shown a picture of something, they focused on it. They focused on the main object in the picture. You'll notice that Russia is also quite high context. It's all about packaging in Russia. When you go to when you arrange a business meeting with somebody from a low context culture, you make an appointment based on what's convenient for both of you. When you make an appointment with somebody from a high context culture, it's all about the impression that you make. It's all about setting the right tone for the entire meeting. It's quite a different way of choosing a meeting place. Now, the Chinese students from the study were tested again in the US 6 months later. And guess what they found? They started to think more like Americans did. They weren't so concerned about the hospital corridor or the concert hall anymore. They reported seeing a camel and a sheep. Now, what can we make of that? Attitudes are flexible. Attitudes change over time. This is neurological evidence. I forgot to mention, they did brain scans of these students while they were doing that. Different parts, functional MRIs, different parts of the brain were lighting up. And the Chinese students, after they were in the States for 6 months, their brains started to light up just like the American students. Now, this is a very important finding, that people will change over time if exposed to a new culture. I can tell you from my experience, I'm from the US, when I go back to the US, it's culture shock one after the other. I'm in such a strange place when I'm there. I would say I'm probably more comfortable in China. So after living outside for 25 years, my attitudes are completely different. I'm more indirect now than I ever was. Czech is a direct culture, but it's more indirect in the States. Now, how can we deal with this? How can we communicate with somebody if they are from a different culture? Let's say it's not easy for an indirect person to talk in the context. It's not easy for a direct person to limit their words to the context. Wait, let me get that straight. See, this is so content. All right. It's not easy for an indirect person to deal in a direct country, because the indirect person if they don't know how to limit their speech just to the point. They're talking around. So they might not get to the point. It's not easy for a direct person to deal in an indirect culture, because they are getting straight to the point and they're not talking so much in the context. So how can we survive? I think once again the answer is with rhetoric, by using mitigating language. Mitigating language is, for example, you've probably seen this graphic, how the British will say one thing when they mean something else. I don't want you to read this. Have you not seen this? Uh-huh. Well, this is a joke, but there is a lot of truth in it. When dealing with somebody from another communication culture, you want to use mitigating language. For example, you might want to think about this. Or instead of saying no, you'll say, perhaps we should think about that. It's a very indirect way of doing it. And it could be very helpful. Using if-then statements. If we do this, then we can do that. This type of mitigating speech is very useful when dealing with somebody from a different communication culture. And you can also say things like, you may know that, or you already know that, or you know this as well as I do. Okay, this is kind of mitigating speech, which, if you go, I mean, the British use it every day. That's just in their blood. They don't know how to be direct. However, you can adopt some of these rhetorical techniques into your speech to close the gap between the different cultures. Number 7 is lifestyle, being versus doing. It's about the overall quality of life versus individual achievement. Do you work to live or live to work? There was an American who was traveling around Mexico. The Americans are quite doing people. Mexicans are quite being people. The American, he finds the best burrito he's ever tasted. And he says, oh, you could make a fortune with these burritos. You should franchise this. It's a great idea. You'd make a lot of money. I know people that would definitely pay more than 10 pesos for this in the States. And the Mexican says, oh, that's nice. How long does it take? He says, well, I don't know. Make a plan, get some financing, do some advertising, get a franchise, make a franchise. You should break even in about 2 years and retire in 10 years. And he says, 10 years? 2 years just to break even? No. I come out here 8-9 hours a day. I do my thing, and then I go home and spend the time with my family. That's what I want to do. Mexicans are being people. UK, in contrast, are very doing people. When the Pilgrims came over to the New World, they didn't say, okay, everybody, let's have tea. They said, no, we have to clear the land over here, we have to raise the cattle over here, we have to build houses over here and get the place ready for more people coming over. Very doing culture. It's quite difficult for a doing person to even imagine how a being culture could be successful. With all that holiday time, all that vacation time, and family time, and walks in the nature. How could a being culture even be successful? Look at Japan. Japan is very... wait, no.